everyone, and welcome to the Sunrise Road podcast, a production of Eastridge Presbyterian Church. Our producer is Vince Rule, and we are so thankful that you have joined us for our conversation today. My name is Melody Jones-Poynton.
And I'm Thomas Dummermuth. We are so excited to be here with you today. And even more excited that today we have another guest with us. Today's guest is our friend Adam Luedtke, who was with us before. Adam has been the director of Contemplate Lincoln for quite a few years, which is a local hub for contemplation here in our community. And in addition to leading retreats for clergy, Christian denomination, churches, and individuals, Adam also founded what is called the Contemplative Community Creators Network, which is a collective of leaders and community creators in the Christian contemplative tradition. Adam brings a whole range of experience and training and expertise here this morning. I think you have a PhD in psychology, Master of Arts in transpersonal studies, certification in transformational coaching and spiritual direction, and you're a practitioner in many ways. Welcome to the show, Adam.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and be with you again.
Yeah, wonderful to have you here. We need some expertise. I feel like for our listeners and for ourselves, for listeners, know we have been talking this season, inspired by a book by Elizabeth Oldfield, Fully Alive, Tending to the Soul in Turbulent Times. That's kind of been our Lenten theme. So we need some expertise in becoming more fully alive, I think. First off, Adam, how fully alive are you?
Well, the one to 10 or A,
Yeah,
B, C?
I don't know. I
No.
mean, how are we doing?
And how do we know?
Yeah.
How are you going to answer
yeah.
that? What's your rationale in answering this question?
Well, I mean, that's a good one. How fully alive am I? I think one of the touchstones would be how present to my life am I?
Mm.
How present am to my life and those around me and those I love. I think presence is a big measure for me of how alive I am. And it's not constant. It ebbs and flows. It can be a roller coaster, and we respond to different things, trauma, grief, distractions, and those kind of things as well. I'd say today I'm pretty fully alive. I guess we're all always fully alive, but I'm pretty present in this moment, preparing for this wonderful podcast with you all.
Awesome. You touched already on a whole range of things that kind of pull us away from that presence, and we've been talking about that a little bit on the show already, and it was impacted our sermon series as well. And one thing we talked a lot about are the things that pull us away in different directions, the distractions, and so on. So why are we? What's your theory? Why are we so susceptible to these pushes and pulls? Why are we not? I mean, you say we're always fully alive, but we're not always present to that. What's happening here?
I think we're presented with a litany of distractions and reasons to turn away. And I think there are times when life, can be too much. Or grief can be more than we can bear in a moment. So there sometimes needs to be a little stepping back before re-stepping into it. But yeah, I mean, between social media, or the world politic, TV, there's just a litany of things to pull us away from being present to our life and others, I think. And I think it's a mystery somewhat of why that's the case. James Finley, a mystic, contemplative Christian mystic, and psychologist, says that most of us at some point come to a point where we realize that we're skimming over the surfaces of our lives, that we're suffering from what he calls depth deprivation. And I think busyness, being a dad of a young family myself, I'm coaching soccer games, which I didn't intend to do, but got pulled in to do, coaching basketball games that I intended to do. And we got karate and, all these different things. And it's hard. There's a million distractions, and some of them good distractions. A lot of what we do with our kids are good. Yeah, but there's just a litany, I think, of things that pull us away from that depth unless we set our attention and our intention towards it.
Do you notice a difference? And I want to sort of be fairly careful here, because I think a lot of those things that you named are, I mean, those are my distractions as well. But there are other distractions that turn into anxiety and worry, like money and, certainly headlines. There's also distractions coming from within, like social media. And I don't want to be too hard on social media, but I know it's time for me to take a break when I start to think about my life in terms of what I'm going to post. Like, that's not that's not reality. So what do you see, as a person with an active young family, doing things that you didn't intend to do? What do you see as the thing that you can keep coming back to center yourself? Sometimes for me, it's not just like, oh, well, I need to turn off social media, although I have done that. But it's also like, but what am I how do I know what I'm coming back to?
That's a good question. I think there are a few things. I think the daily rendezvous with God, whether that's our scripture reading, our prayer, our silent time. For me, I wake up at 6 and do a little centering prayer practice, and then do kind of more extensive prayer practice before getting up and getting to my body a little bit with stretching and working out or whatever it may be. And that time for me is a real centering and way to kind of start my day with that touchstone. Yeah, and then I think little touchstones throughout the day of taking a break, whatever it may be. Like they say, step away from your computer for a few minutes, and stretching. I had a teacher one time that said one of the best things you can do is a few times a day, step away and just look at everything through the eyes of humor. Just the kind of silliness of it all, and the silliness of my own thoughts and my own compulsion to do this and my own stressing about this thing and holding on to it too tightly. So I think those touchstones throughout the day and in the morning, I think, are important to me to return to that centeredness. And I think once we touch that place, we know it. We forget it. I mean, I forget it in the crux of the day. But I think we know it when we experience it. And then it's just trying to get back to that centeredness as often as we can in those micro moments. We can't spend all our day in meditation and prayer, right? We have to do things, especially, those of us that are this kind of what they used to call the householder phase, where we're having kids, married, jobs, producing, those kind of things. Yeah, it's tough. And I think every phase of life has its own obstacles, but I think the one I'm in particular has those kind of stretches where there are things to do. Can't necessarily forget about the bills, right? They exist. Can't necessarily forget about the kids, nor would I want to. So it's like, yeah, how in the midst of all that do I take those micro minutes to retouch with that centeredness?
All of a sudden, Adam, I feel like I don't know you at all. Here I am. I thought that all you did all day was pray. In your office that looks shockingly like you're really in one of our offices.
It blends in, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that step away through the eyes of humor, that lightness. I remember when I was the Sunday where I was trying to preach about our distractibility, and so the text that pulled me back in was Psalm 90, and there's the meditation of our mortality. And I recently heard I recently heard someone say it's like it's the mortality that connects us all, that we're all gonna die, and that there's finitude in all that, and that basically makes our existence stand-up comedy. So they said, and so I kind of like that combination between the lightness of the look at life as humor, as play, in all seriousness, but we're gonna die. And I don't want to say this lighthearted. I don't. That's another something I usually like to think about. And sometimes I feel like ever since I have that beard, I'm looking 10 years older. But it's to compensate other things. And our mortality can something terrifying, but it can also be something extremely freeing in that sense that it kind of puts very serious things that I think are so serious into place.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think Well, the connection there too, I think, with humility and humor. I think humility can be such a wonderful, which in some ways, I think Sabbath could teach us humility, this idea that if I set everything down for the day, the world will go on without me. God's work continues on without me. I'm not so important that I can't step away from the world and all the things for a day and those things to continue. I think is pretty powerful in and of itself, which is kind of the root of humor, right? So I think, yeah, humility. And I've heard even, contemplative practice being kind of the same way as we lean into the resurrection story here as we enter into Holy Week. Very similarly, the contemplative practice can be an act of laying down your life for 20 minutes. I'm going to lay down my life for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever it may be, and then pick it back up at the end of it. I think it's a completely freeing practice. And again, that humility. I'm not so important that the gears stop moving when I'm not there. And it can feel like it is like that kind of tyranny of the now, where it's like, if I'm not active now, if I don't do this now, things are going to fall away. But in my experience, they don't. And one of my favorite humility stories. So there was several years ago, we were doing a program for the folks that were experiencing a loss of income due to being quarantined from a positive COVID test kind of during the height of the pandemic. And we were delivering 2 weeks worth of groceries. And so I had that going on. It just exploded, got way bigger than I could handle. Had a few other things going on, other phone calls that people wanted to do. And I was like, oh, why are people calling me? I'm so important. I'm doing this important thing, this busy thing. So I went to pick up a load of food from Hy-Vee because they're helping donate the supplies for the project. As I was getting out of the car, somehow the seatbelt edge of the chair catches my pants, rips them all the way down the side. All the way down the side. So here I am thinking about my own self-importance. And it's like, what was that I was consumed by a few minutes ago? And just laugh it off, and everything softened. And I came back to a more real reality and let go of those thoughts, and then enjoyed what I was doing afterwards. So I think humor, even our experiences of being brought into humility by reality, I think can be very powerful.
I notice as you're sharing this, you're talking about that terror of now that kind of can get a grab on us. At the same time, you're talking about the practice of being present, and that's in some way that kind of seems like a paradox between the now that has us and the same time to be present to what's going on in the now. I wonder if you want to unpack that a little bit.
Okay. Complicated, but yeah, the first thing as you're asking that question that came to my mind was thinking of when I work with folks in kind of the depths of grief. And the first thing I just say is the only thing you have to do right now is breathe. Mm-hmm. The only thing you have to do right now. There's, funeral arrangements, if that's what it is, and all these kind of things, and the bills that are going to come, and what are the kids going to do, and this and that. And so that's kind of the tyranny of all those things that are pouring in, all those thoughts, all those worries, all that anxiety. But really, all you have to breathe in, breathe out in this moment. And that's all we have to do. Other things will come. We can address those as needed. But we can feel kind of the avalanche of all the different items of our lives sometimes pouring in at one time. And sometimes we'd have to take a little space and acknowledge those. Certainly can't turn them away. We're not going to going back to the bills, shred all the bills and forget that they're there. Just to step away and create a little bit of spacious there and know that all you have to do in this moment is just breathe. I find so often when I set something aside that it's okay. It's okay. That a friend was looking at starting a Sabbath practice new to the Christian tradition, starting kind of a Sunday, stepping away. And so it's like, oh, I can't do this. But it's like, I think if you take the time to do this, you'll find that often God and the universe makes way. It usually makes way for it. If you make a commitment to taking that space will open up for you. And sure enough, it did. And I hesitate to use universals because nothing is universally true except for me. God is good, right? But other than that, I think universals can often fail us. But just to say, I think generally, when we take that space, we set those things down, we find out that they're there when we pick them back up, and all is fine. Going back to the contemplative practice of just laying myself down for 20 minutes. That self will be there for me when I come back to it. Hopefully I come back to it from a much better place than I was before.
I'm intrigued. But by Sabbath, it's. I mean, gosh, the name escapes me. The Jewish philosopher writer who wrote about Sabbath a lot. He called the Sabbath the cathedral in time, as opposed to like in place. I'm curious, without making this dogma, would you share with us how you practice Sabbath?
Yeah. Are we talking about Abraham Heschel?
Yes. Yeah, there we go. Abraham Heschel. There we go.
He's awesome.
Yeah.
My Sabbath actually takes place on Friday, because Sunday's active. A day is a working day for me. Not that Sunday isn't very spiritual for me, but Friday is the day that I set it all aside and don't do, maybe do some householder things such as cleaning up the house and kid activities here and there. But yeah, just to not do and take that step away and know that, again, I'm not so important to the world and to everybody that I can not look at my emails for a day. And everybody who sent me an email that day will survive. Everybody who wanted me to do something that day will go on. And yeah, the work of even Contemplate Lincoln goes on through other folks on that day. So yeah, it's active humility, stepping away. I usually don't check my email intentionally. I don't schedule appointments. And just, yeah, I try to open a space to where I can just be instead of do, as I'd always, that's saying that, we're human beings, but so often we're human doings. And I know before we started this, we were talking about the Enneagram a little bit. I know some of your listeners are familiar with that. I'm a type 3 in the Enneagram. So I am a doer, a performer. So one of the most important things I can do for myself is to step out of that doing. Otherwise, it's just contagious and it doesn't stop when I so closely identify with it that there's no separation. So I have to take that day to step away from being a human doing so that I can sense my truer self in that relationship with God.
That's interesting to me because, I've heard that before. One of my mentors from college said, she was stepping back in her role in ministry because she wanted to be a human being, not a human doing. And so, even in faith context, we think about our value and our worth by the things that we've accomplished on our to-do list. And so as you mentioned, cleaning and doing things on your day off, my day off as well is Friday, and I try to keep it as a Sabbath. And it's really important for me to think about the puttering that I do as joyful instead of as, well, now that's done. Because that's a different kind of day of cleaning. That's like somebody's coming, I need to clean the house. Everybody has a list, finish your list. That's a chore day. But like a Sabbath, can you talk a little bit about the difference between like a Sabbath activity that doesn't value the doing of it or, it being done necessarily, but like how does that change your relationship to what you're doing?
Yeah, I would say freedom was the first word that comes to mind. The freedom of the day. Like I'm free to do the dishes if I walk by the dishes and want to do them, but I'm not, this is the things I have to do. And I'm not, yeah, I mean, we value production in this culture, right? Even as Protestants, the Protestant work ethic, there's so much value based on what we produce. So am I checking the boxes and, rewarding myself based on what I produce? Or am I just resting in that being? And then I walk by, I'm like, I could do that real quick. That sounds like fun. Maybe not fun, but if it sounds like where I should be going.
Fun dishes.
Yeah, dishes. Yeah. So I think freedom and non-structured, and then letting go of the have-tos. My inner voice as a type 3 is have-tos. Have to do this, have to do that. So letting go of those have-tos for the day. And then I realized I really don't have too many have-tos, especially, at the bigger level of thinking about a relationship with God and the divine. Yeah, God has very little have-tos, if any, for me to do. But my inner voice will tell me a litany of 1 million things that I have to do. I think the other thing I notice about Sabbath, particularly if I haven't been doing it well, I won't say that it hurts, but the start of a day, just like some people say this on vacation, it's like, I should be doing something. There's a certain like tension there. Like, this isn't what I'm supposed to be doing. I should be doing this. And I know I'm much more integrated, and I've been practicing it better when I'm willing to let myself relax and let go of so many of those narratives our culture gives us. One of which is, we are what we produce. Another is, have we worked enough to rest versus have we rested enough to work, which is a big flip. I make little notes like these because I think we all have narratives, but no way I can catch one like that in myself of, have I worked enough to rest? And I hear the opposite. I'm like, I'm going to write that down and stare at that, for a week. So I think that's a few things that show up, and the difference between doing things but not doing things to do things on the Sabbath.
I really resonated with that. I should be doing something in vacation. That is really, that came up in therapy the other day. We have in guidebooks, when you go on vacation, right? You have these guidebooks, and then you have the sites that you have to do, and that makes then you're doing the vacation right if you check off all the sites, right? And in German, it's even more pronounced, because the word Zeit in German is called Sehenswürdigkeit. That means it's worthy to be seen. So that's in the word. So somehow people get together and establish a canon. These are the things worth seeing, and then you have to check them off to basically give your vacation time, your Sabbath, the worth. That is a very other thing than what you're talking about, that the worth is the given, and the task at hand is to bask in that dignity that is there without our productivity. Yeah, I do wonder, how do we learn that? I mean, you mentioned a couple of those narratives. You mentioned a couple of those impulses, like, oh, I should check my email, and so on. And those impulses, they are so deep ingrained. How do we resist or unlearn? How do we live into better narratives?
I think the first is to identify them and try to live into better narratives, and then fail at it and continue to practice it again. Not every Friday is perfect for me. Not every time I say I'm going to do Sabbath does it, work out that I don't slip into a temptation or something, especially during the more intense parts and times of life. So I think, the couple things that come from me are becoming aware of those narratives that we tell ourselves and the culture and society tells us. And then try to practice something better, live into something better. And then when we fail, do it again.
I want to talk a little bit, because we've talked a couple weeks ago. We were talking about sort of being centered, going from the sin was sloth, so going from distraction to centeredness.
Attention is something what the author uses. Yeah.
Attention, yeah. And this week we've been talking about going from numbness to ecstasy. And you kind of talked a minute ago about like that feeling of, when you have that, I would say, unity with God or with others experience, or that mountaintop experience, or, whatever it is that you are centering towards. And my spiritual practice is, one of them is yoga. And like, after a good spiritual practice, I'm like, yes, but then I go back, and it's not always like that. And so I kind of feel like I'm chasing that thing where I once found unity. And so what are your, and you mentioned, grief. And so what are your thoughts about being centered in such a way so that we can be in our pain, whatever that might be, and be seeking that thing which is holy, that we're desiring to seek, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. And I think a couple of things that show up. One is we always have to come down from the mountain, right? I think that's one of the great takeaways from the transfiguration story is you have to come down the hill, and sometimes we head towards the cross in some little way, or big way. But yeah, but I think there's also recalling, is everybody familiar with Howard Thurman, who's a Christian contemplative and so early civil rights leader? He's got this wonderful story of his trip to India. So one of the things he was, kind of credited with is he went to India, learned about nonviolent resistance and civil protest, and then bridged that and brought that, and Martin Luther King studied under him and brought that into the American civil rights movement. But during his trip to India, he goes to this mountain. I can't remember the mountain's name, for the sunrise. It's one of the most beautiful things you can do. His wife doesn't want to get up. She sleeps in. And so for years, he says he's going around telling the story how his wife slept in. He got to see this big, beautiful sunrise, peak experience, and then had to come down the mountain. Then eventually his wife wrote this article for some magazine, and she talks about, and I think it's like in defense of the valley dweller. She talks about how she got to go through the bazaar and see all these beautiful clothings and meet these people, these sellers, and see the poverty too, but then also, all these different things. So there's so much in the valley that I think we can miss, and we often credit, the transcendent experiences more than I think we do our experiences in the valley. And this is just as real, I think, and just as important, but they inform each other. For instance, there's kind of this takeaway about the transfiguration that kind of fed and nurtured the disciples through, they'd seen this great glimmer that held them on, even, as they fell apart, denied Jesus, and all, Peter kind of stumbles his way through that piece of it, as we do through grief. But those moments can be moments as touchstones to kind of look back on and know this deeper reality behind the reality we're experiencing. So I think that way it can be important, but I also think being present to the valley and being a valley dweller, I think, is also important. And not, numbness, I think, can serve its very, very short-term purposes. If the experience becomes too intense that we can't handle it, it can be kind of a self-preservation mechanism. That's why it's there. That's why it evolved in us. But to, see as we can to move back into presence and bringing that wrestling with us into our close confidence into God. The Psalms obviously is full of that. Lamentations is full of that. There's a great new children's Bible called what's it called? But it's for contemplative and kind kids is the subtitle of it. But we've been reading it, and it just came out this last year. In the story of Jacob and the wrestling match, and it ends with God saying, "I want you to bring with me your questions, your wrestling, your grief. I welcome all of that." And that's something we don't. You got it. I see it.
Book of Belonging.
Book of Belonging. So awesome.
For you later, Adam.
Yep. So awesome. So plug for that book. But yeah, that all that is part of our relationship with the divine, and all stuff we can bring to God in our prayer times and wrestle with. And I don't think, sometimes I didn't hear that enough in my spiritual development growing up, even though it's right there in the Psalms, Lamentations, and even in the Gospels. So.
As I hear you talk about that mountain peak that we want to cling, that we either want to reach or cling on to or go back to, I came across this poem a while back by Harry Baker, a spoken word artist, and it begins, "It's not the flowers, it's the weeding in the mud with you," and then it keeps going on with those, like those things that we think that images of a perfect relationship and so on, and the peak experiences, but it's the with you that matters. And the last line is, or the refrain that comes back to is like, "I want to be here long enough to gather dust with you," which is such an other image, right? To gathering dust together, which could be seen as numbness, but it does not need to be at all. It can be as very real in the present. Yeah. That's not a question.
It's a good poem. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I a couple of thoughts. One is that, you know, the idea of a contemplative practice or contemplative prayer. In one of the songs that we sang when we talked about this was, I want to be where my feet are. And how can we practice like just being where we are, but also in relationship with God and acknowledging our relationship with others. And so this book of belonging, you know, that you mentioned, and so here's my story. Is a couple of months ago, Adam and I were together in a different venue, and in person. We were talking with a Missio group about different ways that we were seeking wholeness in our community, and ways that we were seeking that. Anyway, Adam mentioned this book, and both of my colleagues, Thomas and Chris, had this book. And so I came back, and we were talking about it, and now we've given this book out. I've given this book out to a few people, and it's inspired our summer sermon series. So
Awesome.
kind of using the book of belonging, but also, you know, thinking about just, I don't know, I think we just, as adults, we make things so hard, and we make it so hard to be around what Elizabeth Oldfield calls people who are not like me. And especially now, you know, there's so many ways that we're sort of saying, well, I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to practice, you know, but how wonderful to think of that image of walking through the valley and noticing what's around you and experiencing something that is unlike anything you would experience on the mountaintop. Because it's all just a practice, right? Like I'm not going to be perfect ever.
Mm-hmm.
No. Yeah, I mean that temptation of perfection, right? You mentioned that before with the Sabbath practice, like the ideal what good rest or good spirituality or whatever should look like can really be another thing that can get in our way. To be really in presence to God's presence in our lives. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 The idea of perfection and shame cycles, which I always think of Brene Brown, which if you ever want to dive into that, dive into Brene Brown, because it's such awesome stuff. But yeah, I think shame cycles very much can turn us from being present to ourselves and others. Yeah, and I was hearing Brene Brown say something as Melody was talking to about, you know, being in that valley, but being close to what we may consider the other. And Brene Brown says, people are really hard to hate close up. They're really hard to hate close up. And I think that's very important advice for us right now with our siloing. You know, we've been creating our own social media networks now, right? So we're moving to different states even to be with our side of the spectrum. And I think so when that happens and we don't have that close contact, often what we get are caricatures of others. You know, if you go on a family vacation, any amusement park, any place has these little artists, and they draw you with a funny nose, you know, whatever your biggest, you know, kind of features in your face, they exaggerate. I think that's mainly what we get from the other side of the spectrum and the people we don't know. And even historically, I think you can go all the way back to the propaganda during the Crusades on the Jews, Jewish people, and even Nazis, and through to the early civil rights movement, that, you know, it's caricatures of the other. And that's how we learn to fear others. And that's how we propagate fear and misunderstanding. But when we get close, we find that people are awfully hard to hate. And the things that we've heard about them are often not true, usually always an exaggeration. So yeah, I advocate for closeness, which has been part of my wife's and I's spiritual journey the last year. One of the things we did due to kind of some health issues in the house is we're homeschooling our oldest daughter. And so we're involved with the homeschool community, which has been great. Also, not to give myself away too much, but on the complete opposite end, probably on the political spectrum of most people we're dealing with, and being relationship with. But I've come to find, though, what I thought about them is not true. And I think that they're learning what they probably thought about my wife and I. is not true. And we're learning to love each other and be in community with each other in a way that I would not have imagined 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm. That is so lovely. And thank you for sharing with us. I want to make sure that we have time for you to give a plug for Contemplate Lincoln. And if anybody is interested, last week we had our friend, Patty Forsberg on. And so just, where can people find more information about Contemplate Lincoln, about you as a spiritual director, anything else that you want to give a plug to here?
Yeah. So contemplatelincoln.org is our home website. We have a online, somewhat social media platform, community.contemplatelincoln.org as well. That is, we are international now, I get to say, because we have 2 people from Canada and 2 people from the UK, which is super fun. And so we have in-person stuff a few times a month here in Lincoln, and then the vast majority of our stuff is online and Zoom and accessible from everywhere. Big thing coming up is we're going to dive into Richard Rohr's new book, The Tears of Things. So a little plug for that. And if you're in Lincoln, join us for Prairie Church sometime at Pioneers Park. That's one of our in-person things. But yeah, contemplatelincoln.org and check us out, and love to see you sometime.
How often do you do prayer?
Things is in here somewhere.
Are you looking for Richard Rohr in your office?
Yes.
How often do you do Prairie Church?
We do Prairie Church once a month on second Saturdays at 10 p.m. So once a month. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Adam, thank you so much for being with us. We could go on for hours here, but you have a wealth of experience and insight and practice. Thank you for sharing some of that with us. Yes, I would love for our listeners to connect with your work beyond this podcast. And yeah, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, friend.
Thank you.
And as always, thank you for joining us on this podcast of the Sunrise Road. And we invite you to check us out in the future. I don't actually know when our next podcast is, but there will be more to come at some point, I promise. And thanks for joining us. We'll see you.